And we are live. Or recording, I guess is a better way to say it. Welcome to the Max Revenue Show. I am your host, Trey Shields, along with the producer whisperer himself, aka the Zen Master of commercial insurance, Micah Salas. What's the word?
What's going on? I'm in Wisconsin. 65 degrees
I'm so
after a,
jealous. It is
after 7 weeks of six-figure temperatures in Austin, Texas. I am happy to be back home for a couple days.
it is at recording this, it is 9:08 on Monday morning, and in New Orleans it's already 93 degrees. Feels like 100.
I was going to say with what 150% humidity.
Freaking miserable, bro.
uh, Yuck.
All right.
Y-
So if you're listening to this episode, we sent out the newsletter last night or yesterday. I actually got ahead of this one. I wrote this one way in advance, and then I think I sent it out at like 10 o'clock on Sunday. So I think it's kind of funny because when I was looking at the results of like the open rate, it was slow to start with, and I think that's just because most people are used to getting it at like 10:30 at night when I actually have time to write the sucker. But anyways, that's besides the point. So basically, this is your story, and I wrote it from the perspective of Max Revenue because he is the, I don't know, he is the, everything goes through this fictional character called Max. We just share our stories through him. But this is your gig. I also changed a couple of the details, which I'm sure you saw, to protect the innocent. Um, but yeah, we're calling it the $100 million distributor. Is the name of the post was Big League Accounts with Bush League Agents. So I will turn it over to you if you want to recount the story, and then we're just going to kind of riff on it. We can go over tactics and all this stuff, broad view, but I really like this. I really like the case studies, and we're getting a lot of response that like they really like the stories and hearing how we work through things very specifically. Because any quote unquote guru out there can just tell you, "Hey, do X, Y, and Z." But what matters is how do you apply it? How do you do it when you're actually in the trenches? So I'm going to turn it over to you, and you can recount it if you want. Or this is your baby. We'll just let you run with it. So let's go into the $100 million distributor.
Let's do it. Well, first of all, this story goes back a couple episodes now because this is tied to the text and the 14
Ah,
follow-ups. So it's kind of a cool. So check out our, prior podcast or posts for kind of the background of how this meeting came to be. Um, and one thing I'll say from the get-go is this is a little bit of a unique situation because I learned through the research call that we heavily, encourage you to do in the due diligence process that the agent was already going to be fired essentially. So they had made up their mind like we've outgrown our agent, it's time to move on. So that is a very important distinction to make because I think a lot of times I've won a lot of accounts where it's me versus the current agent. That's it. So it's a whole different ballgame when it's really the current agent's out of the mix. It's you versus all these people you don't know. So then it's like, what do you do from there? And I think that's an important distinction to make because it does change the approach a little bit, right? You're not trying to get the agent fired; they're kind of already fired. You're trying to get, and this is really making the case to be hired. Now it has a lot of parallels and similarities to what you do in any situation, but it is different. So I'll just kind of recap the story from the final meeting, from this finalist meeting, how I walked in and what happened from there, and I'll hit on why this agent was bush league in my opinion. Um, so prepping for this meeting, all I know talking with the controller is that hey, the president CEO is going to be there, his sister who's also part owner and basically like a you could say like a office manager role, and then the safety person. So I'm like sitting there prepping for the meeting, thinking like, okay, these guys do almost 100 million in revenue, they have 300 some employees. You kind of just start to your mind will play a little bit of tricks on you sometimes, where it's all right. All right, sorry, I got a call, so I had to cut out there. But your mind will start to play with you, like, hey man, what are you going to wear? How are you going to speak? What are you going to impress these people? Like the whole imposter syndrome. Like, am I good enough? I mean, I'm just coming by myself. So one of the questions I was asked from the controller, I asked him first. I said, "Hey man, who's all going to be there?" good question to ask in your research meetings. He tells me, he's like, who's going to be there from your team? And I was like, uh, just myself. Then I was like, oh shoot. I was like, well, just myself. I'm the construction practice leader, which I am. I said, and honestly, I said a lot of agencies will sing bring the whole circus in. I'm just not about that. I just would rather, kind of give you a view of how it'll look like when we actually work together, and who's going to be working with you the most. Now, I don't have my account team local. They're out of Minneapolis, so that's a different challenge, but I know people listening probably have that same challenge, but just own it, right? We've talked about that before, owning your quote unquote weaknesses, right? So for me, that was technically could be looked at as a weakness. And so I just owned it, right? And the guy was like, okay. Anyway, so I get to the finalist. So I get to the meeting. I show up. I don't know what to expect. I wear a sports coat. Never wear a sports coat, but I was like, yeah, I'm just going to wear it. Didn't wear a suit or a tie or anything like that. But I get in there and immediately I can tell, oh, this is cool. They're laid back people. Well, then the owner's the last guy to come in. He comes in with a dip in dip in his mouth. Looks like he just got walked off the golf course playing 9 holes. He's got his polo, one button polo and shorts, and like I don't know if he had boat shoes or sandals or flip flops or what, but super good guy. Make our small talk and then just get into it. So I think we start talking, and I'm doing my due diligence, going through what I find. Right, it's all about them, and it's just super conversational. The meeting went for about an hour, 10 minutes to be exact, and they were talking a lot. And it was just, oh, I've never thought of this idea, or we never had anyone review this limit before. Or I like this strategy, or a lot of the pain points were around HR stuff. Um, and the experience mod, right? They had no clue what their lowest possible modifier was. On the HR stuff, we start just talking about like, he's like, my project managers are basically acting like HR. He's like, yeah, we're 300 employees, but we've grown so fast. He's like, that's what keeps me up at night. I'm scared of, like, I don't know. I just don't want to be messing with my employees acting as HR folks. So I get in there and tell guys to get off the job site. We fire them on the spot sometimes. I have questions. Is that right? Is that wrong? So it was just super conversational. He's opening up to me. And so this is kind of interesting because some people would say these conversations should have been had in the research call and not the final presentation. But I kind of disagree because first of all, I didn't meet with the CEO before this call, so I didn't really know. I was just working through the CFO/controller. And I've always been a fan of keeping the final presentation conversational because I think it really gives the buyer a chance to get to know you and kind of what a relationship would look like in a partnership. So yeah, I mean, guys, listening, the insurance agent, when I say Bush League, I don't use that word lightly. I don't just throw it around at agents out there because I know everyone's trying to do their best, and we can get a bad rap from if we're the incumbent sometimes. But like, I'm talking simple things like hey, when it's just our agent and his wife, when they're out, I have no one to call. Our renewals, yeah, they would just come in with an increase and say, there's a lot of auto accidents. That's why, the week before. There was no pre-renewal strategy meeting. There was no conversation at all around like just work comp strategies, and not saying you got to be a work comp expert, but there was just no conversation at all to be had. And then getting just copies of their policies was like dragging, pulling teeth. The guy couldn't even scrounge up copies. He had to like scan them all in and send them over. And so just some of the basics, and the client got onto it, right? They're just like, there's no communication. There's no talk proactively around anything. And this is account paying $1 million in premium, right? So yeah, so I mean, that's kind of really the gist of the story. It was just like, there was so much weaknesses, but again, it was unique because the agent was already kind of fired in the buyer's mind. So I was trying to stand out from what other agents might potentially be saying. And that was kind of a challenge because I don't know what they're going to be saying about me. So I just had to kind of own what I thought our strengths were and really speak to those. And, and also talk a little bit about to what some reasons they might lean to some other people, like some bigger agencies, right? Like, why would they lean into that? And then kind of almost talk about it without directly talking about the competition. So, yeah, I know that was kind of an all over the place story, but, it ended really well. Like I said, we spoke for an hour. They asked, they said probably this week we should know something. He was talking as if we were already partnering together, like, hey, yeah, that would be great. We need this. We got to do this. So, that's how it ended. I know, Trey, you asked me, like, did you ask for the BOR? I actually never really do in these big proposals. I never have. And I built, seven-figure book of business without asking for really a BOR. Now, though, I do ask softly. I get to the end of the presentation. I have one final slide. It says next steps. And I lay it out and I say, hey, if you want to move forward with us, I'd love to partner. I think we can help you, but here's the next steps. I'm not going to twist your arm. So, I know you're probably talking with other people, but I feel confident that we could be a great fit if given the opportunity. And I said, here's the next steps. Here's the timeline. And that's how it ends. We talked and shook hands and said, we'll be in touch. Now that's probably to the sales gurus listening out there, and the guys who grew up in the 90s would probably, stone me for ending it that way. But that's just what I've always done. And I don't know. I feel like that's how I want to be sold to. And maybe that's the wrong mentality to take, but it's worked. So
yeah, I
that's the
also
story.
would think it goes back to the why a lot of people have a bad taste in their mouth with BORs. It's because of the '90s hard, hard selling, high pressure sales tactics. So I think especially the business owners have been around a while. This isn't their first time the BOR subject's been broached, and they can be a little bit gun shy. So I really like you take a more passive approach, put it in there, put it on them. Hey, if you want to move forward, this is what it would look like. Just not here to twist your arm. If you can just give me a decision by X date. So I really like that. I wrote a couple things down as you talked. Oh, by the way, that is our. If we have one complaint about the producer playbook, that's it. It's like there wasn't a module on like how to ask for the BOR, and I'm like, no, it's in there. It's just like it's
It's who we
in
are.
that
It's
one little
integrated.
spot where you say like next steps. Like that's it. That is the ask. So, anyways,
Good point.
So a couple things here. I want to lay out the context because you never know when somebody's coming into our ecosystem, you don't know what they do and don't know about kind of our process. So I just want to go back again. We're big into cold outbound. So we're calling in. We are not positioning ourselves for the quote on that initial call. We're, kind of due diligence, right? Like, hey, what do you guys do as far as due diligence for your program? Our ideal customer self-selects in. We then do kind of that, how the insurance game is played, either on that call or we do it on another call. We get policies, different things in, do a research call to kind of go back and unravel some more questions we may have or things that have presented themselves through us doing our research. Then we circle back and we present, which is what you were doing, which is where this story takes place. But because you had not actually gotten screen time with the head decision maker yet, you kind of adapted this to be that as well. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, and that happens. I mean, I know we preach get the decision maker, ultimate DM on the phone. In these bigger accounts, guys, it's just tough to do that. You know, and if it takes the finalist meeting to get it done, who cares, right? I still got an hour of quality time with the guy, and truth be told, he's not in. He walked in with a dip in his mouth. He doesn't really give a damn about the insurance. He just wants to make sure their legacy is protected. That's his main thing, right? And like, that they have a broker who's looking out for them, they can grow with. That's what he cares about. And so he really trusted the controller. They brought him in just 2 years ago. He's a bright guy to really run this point on this thing. So he is the guy I was working with was a part decision maker. I would say he has a heavy influence. They trust him. He's just not the final sign off.
Gotcha. All right. So we get into this this presentation, and typically, like you said, we find ourselves in one of two situations. We're either what Schwantz would talk about. We're trying to get the other guy fired, right? It's us versus the incumbent. This is a unique situation where this is you versus, like, you already know they're firing their guy. This is you versus whoever else. Are they interviewing 3 people, 2 people, one other person? You don't know. So the big thing I wrote down is how do you stand out in a broker selection when you don't know who you're going up against? So like, how do you think about that? How did you approach that? What was your game plan? And then what were some of those either, talk tracks where you were positioning yourself as their ideal solution?
Yeah, great question. So there's a couple different ways. I think one is the diligence process lends itself to differentiating you because let's face it, it's all about them, right? And that's how you differentiate yourself. You make it all about them, and that's where the client can see who's the best fit for them based on who brings in the different, what ideas they bring to the table. So in the research process, when I was talking with my contact, uh, I told him, I said, "Hey, explain the game," and I said, what I would recommend that you do when you're going through this process is whoever you bring in. I don't know if you're bringing 5 brokers, 2, 1, whatever. Leave it open ended, right? And so you guys use this when you're talking with your prospects. So I encourage it. I coach them, right? Instead of doing an RFP or an RFQ, everyone's going to sing the same song and dance. It's going to be hard to differentiate. So I said the way I differentiate myself is through providing you value up front through due diligence. Some companies will charge you 10, 15 grand for this. I do this no cost to bring you value and for you to get a chance to see what it would look like to work with me. So that's kind of the setup. Get to this finalist meeting, you're asking, how do you differentiate yourself then through the due diligence? Sometimes we can get so lost in what you find in the policies. Again, it's not that's not what it's all about. It's about what ideas you bring to the table. So like when I was going through their policies, they were pretty good. There was really no issues. And I led with that. I said, "Hey guys, I didn't really find a whole lot, but here's 3 or 4 bullet points that caused me, to think twice about things. One is, and so this is where I just bring ideas. For them specifically, I thought their umbrella limit looked really, really low, given the amount of vehicles they had on the road and just the size of their company. And so we talked about that point for like 5 minutes, and they're like, "I haven't thought about that." We started going on, go down that tangent. I brought another idea up just on like they had $1 million limit for uninsured, underinsured motorist, right? And why they're paid 24 grand a year just for that coverage. And I was like, why not carry 100 possibly? Talk with an attorney first, but it's really a work comp coverage if someone's hurt. And they're like, yeah. And so then I was like, you can reallocate that 20 grand to pay out for that extra $1 million of umbrella limit. And so it's just, I'm not going to go through every point, but that's kind of when I say ideas, that's what I'm talking about. Like, how do you think differently about their program and just bring up ideas? And maybe they've heard them before. You don't know that, but you got to bring them up and let them tell you, if they haven't heard that or so. Um, every idea you're bringing up is tied back to them, right? It's like, hey, would they care about this idea? Nah, then don't bring it up in the meeting. If I was in their shoes, would they care about this? Yeah, I think they would, or I would. Okay, bring that up then. So again, we lay this out in the due diligence, but it's always them that it's really, you know, it's what you look like currently, and then it's ideas and strategies for the long term if we were to partner again together. So I think we talk about policy review. That's the first part. This is a snapshot where you're at today and some ideas. But then the next phase of this presentation and how I differentiate myself was strategies we would implement short term and long term to if we were hired, right? This is how we help your business. And I've been kind of hot on this topic, this long term thinking topic, the last 2 weeks. Just coached a newer producer, and that'll be on our diary week 2 video coming out this week
Why
on
don't you
YouTube.
Why don't you tell everybody what that is real quick? That way they can
Yeah,
go
so
follow it if they want.
yeah, and I highly recommend this for managers and also producers. But hired a new guy at our agency. I'm his mentor, really his manager, but not trying to be his mentor. And he just started last week, so I thought it'd be cool to do a video series and just go week by week, give you guys a behind the scenes view of what he's going through, and then what I'm going through as his manager slash mentor, and just sharing that with people. Like, hey, here's this what he's doing well, here's his challenges, and here's what we're working on for the next week. So yeah, go check it out.
Gotcha. It's on our YouTube channel. It's going to be titled basically Diary of a New Producer. So if you want to follow that, I like I said, I think these stories and real world case studies I think that's where you learn the most, right? Because it's all of the tips, tricks, strategies, but with context in the real world. What does this actually look like? So if that
Yep.
sounds like your cup of tea, go check it out. All right, go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt. Long-term thinking.
Yeah, so that was it. So you asked, how do I differentiate myself? It's just the ideas you're bringing to the table, but it's also like short. It's talking about short term, which is the renewal. Everyone kind of talks about that, but I still think you could talk strategically about the renewal upcoming. Like, here's the markets we'd go to. Here's what's going on in the marketplace. And then the long-term talk is 2 year, 3 year, 5 years from now, this is what I think we'd work on. It could be their work comp, could be HR policies, it could be whatever the pain point is. And so that's how I would differentiate ourselves, right? And then I think if your agency has something unique, I know Trey, you have a bunch of exclusive markets or whatever, not a bunch, but one or two, then yeah, that's where you hype that up at the end, where it's like them, us, and then really, them, I guess, them fit us, at the end where we talk about us, I talk about employee ownership personally, right? We're 100% employee owned. I think it makes us unique, um, because everyone has ownership in the company and they take more pride in the work and whatever, you talk to your strengths. So that's kind of the model I'd follow is those three parts.
We mentioned this in a couple of podcasts back. I don't remember which one, but talking about, I think this was maybe like the head of office where you used to be, but y'all went into this big presentation and he said something like, "Hey, here's what to look out for when X, Y, and Z comes in." Remember what I'm talking about? Did you do
Yes.
that? Did
Yeah.
that play? Did that situation pop up? And can you give us the backstory on that?
Well, the story on that is, and it wasn't my deal, but a friend of mine was working it with our old head of office, and this guy's from New York. Your stereotypical New Yorker down in Texas, and just super kind of a ballsy guy, right? Like would say things in a very professional way to people that would, you know, maybe be uncomfortable for a lot of us other people to say. But he gets to this finalist meeting. We're the first to present, and he's like, "Hey, who else are you talking to?" Right? And he's like, "I know you're going to be talking with. You're probably going to be bringing in, USI. I'll drop a name, right? USI, and then some other XYZ big broker. Well, this guy used to work at one of the agencies, and he's like, so they're going to come out here, and this is what they're going to do. And if I'm wrong, tell me it. But if I'm right, shoot me a note after the meeting." And basically, he's like, they're going to come out with this guy. This guy is going to be this claim specialist. This guy's going to be their HR specialist. And so he said that, and after the CFO at this prospect had met with all these companies, he called back and was like, "Hey, we won the account." And then he was like, "Yeah, by the way, you were spot on. That's what they did." Now, one cool thing after that story, I was watching the documentary Air about the guy who was getting the Jordan, trying to build Nike,
Mm-hmm.
Sonny Vaccaro. And he used the same method. And then I thought to myself, man, did my old head of office pull this method from the, but because he was trying to pitch, Nike was trying to beat out Converse and trying to beat out Reebok or whoever the biggest was at the time, Adidas, I think. And he told them that was part of his playbook. When he was first to present, he was the underdog. He told them exactly what Michael Jordan's mom, exactly what these other companies would be pitching them and how what their style would be like. And it had a huge impact because then I think you're like, wow, this guy knew his stuff, and it just helps you stand out. But no, to answer your question, I did not really use that approach because I don't know who I was competing against, and I actually don't know if I was competing against anybody still. I mean, they might have just brought me in because they went through this process pretty quick. So it's like from first meeting to finalist meeting, it was like a 10-day process. So I don't know, who I'm competing against, but good point though.
I think a lot of people, myself included, originally you would think like, "Oh, I want to be last to present," but because you want to be top of mind at the end. But I think there's a lot of power to being the first to present, because you really get to set the frame, right? Like what you're talking about with, and so now you're giving them the lens that they are going to be looking through as everybody else comes and tries to jump through all the hoops. So I think it's really powerful to be the first or the second, like one of the first if you're going through some type of broker selection. Um, the other thing I wrote down is so I think most people, you can look at an EMOD and you can kind of say, okay, I can. It's very easy to go down that rabbit hole with somebody. You can look at limits, you can do whatever. I thought it was really interesting how you got into the HR with them. It's not like there's something regarding HR that just jumps out in policies. So how did you open that can of worms? Like, what questions were you asking that kind of uncovered that they may or may not have pain points? And frankly, a lot of times they don't even know if they're having pain and related to HR until you kind of, by the questions you ask, kind of open that door. So how do you get into that HR talk track? I'm interested.
Yeah, and it's probably something I could get better at. And actually give a shout out to one of the OGs, David Carruthers. I think he's hyped the HR talk angle a lot. I really haven't, unfortunately, like consumed a bunch of that content from him, but I've just seen like the headlines on the HR and using that as an angle. So I think he's maybe gone into a lot of detail on that. So if you're listening, David, thank you, I guess, for leading the way on that. But um, the way it came up in, and I've brought it up, is one is around EPLI, Employment Practice Liability Insurance. Just I saw they didn't have that policy, kind of bring that up in the beginning, and they're like, oh yeah, yeah. They kind of I think that sparked their mind. And then when it came to strategies and ideas, one of mine personally was to hire a full-time consulting agency, risk management, to create an action plan and then quarterly meetings with them to improve their safety. And as I was pitching that to them, I said they also can do HR, and we have an HR hotline and stuff like that. And then it sparked. And then that's really what sparked it. It wasn't me asking some great question. It was more like him just hearing me and was like, "Wow, so you could do this," and then just sparked a conversation. Um, but it was a really big pain point for an owner of a company, which I never really had heard of before, because usually 300-person company, they got an HR person, but apparently these guys
Yeah,
don't. So,
anytime there's a lot of growth really quick,
yep.
I feel like that's always something that pops up. They're like, well, we had 5 trucks and 15 employees 3 years ago, and now we have 100 and, whatever. The growth, anytime growth is coming up, that seems to be kind of a red flag for that, for me, anyways. Um, so I guess we'll put a bow on this thing. The purpose of the newsletter, and then also of this, I guess the big takeaway, there's a lot of takeaways, but I guess for me, my biggest takeaway from hearing this story was, we think that these big accounts are always buttoned up, and the reality is they're not. They're not always buttoned up. So just because you're coming across this big account on your prospect list, don't just glaze over that. Give them a call. They're just like any other business. I mean, unless they're literally a Fortune 1000, give
Yeah.
them a call. Right? They put on their pants one leg at a time, just like you. They have an agent who is a fallible human being, just like you. There's probably some type of issue there. Whether or not they're willing to, go into the due diligence process is another story. But you know, there's a lot of revenue that's out there that gets looked over because you falsely assume that they're big, they've got to have some badass national firm, and they're all tight and wrapped up. And I think this is a perfect example that it's not always the case. And just because they are with a big national firm doesn't mean that they're tightened up. You know what I mean? So there's always, don't just gloss over. Huge mistake I've made. Don't be like me. Give the big boys a call.
Yeah, and that's excellent points. What I would add on to that, and kind of an interesting lesson is, I was thinking about this, is to the importance of diversification of your insurance client portfolio. Because over the last 4 weeks, I've picked up 3 BORs, but guess how small they are, right? 6,000 in revenue, 5,000 in revenue, and then the last week was like 8,500. So, 3 wins over the last 4 weeks, but totaling, let's just say 18, 19,000 in revenue. Now, if I land this one, it could just, we're talking 140,000 in revenue. It could make my whole year look fantastic. It already, have some wins previous, but the point is that um, if I don't win it, well, I look back over this past year and I still had a decent year with a bunch of these 5, 6, 8s. I had a 30, some other size deals, a 17, but don't discount all those. So the importance of diversity, if you only whale hunt, I'd be so nervous waiting to hear back from these guys. Sure, I'd love to win it. Like, I want to win it. But if I don't win it, I've diversified enough to build up a buffer where it's like, okay, I've had a decent year, but these are the ones that make you have a great year. So don't go all in on just whale hunting, because you could be starving, right, to death. I think you eat, you pay the bills with the average size accounts, I guess you could say, and these other ones are just a cherry on top. But you don't want to live or die on the whale. You want to live or
Yeah.
die on the fish every day.
Ooh, I like that. That's a good analogy. I'll throw this quick anecdote out there real quick. So I used to work with a guy, and I'm not going to say his name. I love him to death. If you you know who you are if you're listening to this and you hear this story. I love you. I'm not throwing shade. It's just a good lesson to be learned. Dude had like 10 or 12 accounts, and that was his thing. He's like, I hunt elephants, and so some bitch did. He had 12 accounts and damn near $1 million book, and everybody, 3 or 4 accounts made up 90% of his book because he was an elephant hunter. He went out and killed one big elephant a year. Well, I'll be damned if he didn't. All 4 of those some bitches got moved into a captive by somebody else, all in the same year, and he went from almost $1 million book to like to pre-validation numbers in one effing year. So it takes all of it. It takes the 2s, the 5s, the 10s, the 20s, the 100s. Like Micah said, live off the fish, and then let the whales just be a feast. That's just icing on top.
I was thinking we got to come up with a slogan because I was thinking about it this weekend. Small fish feed you, whales something. I thought it'd be kind of cool. But it's very true. The small fish feed you, they pay the bills, they keep you peaceful, sustainable, but the whales are awesome, but just you go all in, just be cautious. But yeah, just like you said, Trey, I know guys who have gone all in on whales. They miss them. I knew a younger guy. He's not even in the game anymore. Crushed it. Was a rising star at MMA. Had it landed 2 monsters his second year. Then he got off the wagon, right? He wasn't that consistent producer, got out of the insurance game altogether. Like 3-4 years later was producing. Just wasn't getting excited about the small stuff either, and that's where it's like, it takes discipline just to get out there and grind and just celebrate the small victories. And then when you hit the whales, just, be happy, but just know what's feeding you. So
fish pay the bills, whales pay for your retirement.
there we go. Or
boom.
Yeah, fish pay the bills, whales. Something got to rhyme with whales. Got some alliteration in there.
Fish pay the bills, whales pay for thrills, the vacations, the whatever. Yeah, you digging it? That's why I'm the content guy, baby. I'm the content. I'm fucking terrible insurance producer, but give me 5 minutes and a cup of coffee, and I can spin you a tale on LinkedIn, baby.
Hey man, that's what matters.
That's the bride. All right. Well, with that, let's wrap it up. A couple call to actions here to end it. If you don't know, we have a thing called the Producer Playbook. It's a kind of a mini course, not really mini. It's like 3 hours of video content. Basically, walks you through, how to build a book of business from start to finish. If that's what you're looking for, you're a new producer, you're a producer who's been in the game a while, and you're looking to kind of get out of the quoting and start learning how to sell with BORs. I think that course would be what you're looking for. It's not expensive. It's like $195. It's less than a night out with friends. Also, go check out the Max Revenue channel on YouTube. A lot of great stuff there. Like I said, we have the Diary of the New Producer that's coming out, basically documenting Micah and this new guy in his firm and how they teach him from scratch. Hey, let's do this week 1. Let's do this week 2. Let's do this week 3. So I think that'll be fun to follow along and see how that goes. And then lastly, if for some crazy reason you're not a subscriber to the Max Revenue letter, what are you doing? Let's get that done. maxrevenueletter.beehive.com. It has traditionally been a newsletter once a week. I'm going to start sprinkling in more throughout the week. I just got a wild hair, and I've got more stories and stuff that we want to tell. LinkedIn's being a bitch right now, and so the algo's not letting us get the reach. So I'm going to drip some more good stuff in your inbox. And you know what? If you decide that, hey, I don't like all this extra value, then unsubscribe. Good riddance. Be gone. So with that, I bid you adieu and appreciate the follow. Go give them hell this week.
And remember, small fish pay the bills, whales pay the thrills.
Yeah. LFG. All right. See y'all next week.
Adios.